Now, the important thing to realize about the vaccine side effects is that there is no connection at all between vaccines and other diseases like diabetes, asthma, or autism. There was, within the last 20 years or so, a controversy trying to connect vaccines to autism. And some people still hold on to this idea, even though it is completely and totally disproven. The reason for this is because there was one paper that came out about 20 years ago indicating that there may be a link between vaccines and autism. This was authored by a scientist, Andrew Wakefield. Andrew Wakefield, subsequent to the publication of that paper, about 5 years after it came out, admitted to fraudulently making up and manufacturing data in order to publish that paper and gain notoriety. As a result of admitting to lying about this information, he was fired from his position, all grant funding was removed, and his paper was retracted. Despite that, individuals still believe that there is a link between autism and vaccines, primarily because many people in the popular news media and entertainment industry are still advocating for this perspective. There is, in fact, the opposite connection now, where the more people get vaccinated, the less likely they are to have autism. But still, in light of all of this evidence, people have not changed their mind. So what we have now is a change in vaccines and vaccine-preventable diseases over the last 20 years. Here's the statistics from 1999, where in the United States, we didn't have smallpox at all anymore because, again, as I mentioned, it was completely eradicated essentially in 1979, so about 40 years ago, from the world. The only place it exists now is in government freezers. Diphtheria was completely eradicated from the United States as well. Interestingly, it was in very low levels in the Soviet Russia, and then with the fall of the communist era in Soviet Russia, healthcare for the typical USSR citizen was discontinued and vaccines were no longer given. And as a result, the rate of diphtheria in USSR in the 90s and early 2000s skyrocketed. Thankfully, we still have parents vaccinating their children against diphtheria. It's in the DTaP or Tdap vaccine. And so we still have in the US 100% elimination of diphtheria. Likewise with polio, we don't have polio in the US anymore either. The World Health Organization has tried to eradicate polio completely from the world, just like they did with smallpox. But there are some holdouts in places like Syria and Pakistan where war-torn regions and mountainous areas make getting vaccines and medical access very difficult. There's still a hope that one day, however, polio will be completely eliminated from the world as well. Measles was, as you can see in 1999, 100% eradicated from the United States. That may come as a surprise to you if you've heard of some of the measles outbreaks that we've had in the US, namely in Disneyland and in BART trains in the Bay Area. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit. But measles has definitely come back and led to the deaths of some children in the US since 1999. And the reason for that is because parents aren't vaccinating their children with the MMR vaccine like they used to. And so children are now getting sick from measles and dying from measles. This isn't just happening in the US, but it's also happening in Australia and Europe, where as a result of the decline in MMR vaccinations of parents for their children, we've seen measles increase. And in 2018, summer of 2018, dozens of children in Eastern Europe died from measles completely unnecessarily because their parents didn't vaccinate their children. We also had a very small rate of other diseases like Haemophilus influenzae, that's another vaccine preventable disease, mumps, which is part of the MMR vaccine as well, measles, mumps, rubella. Rubella, as you can see, was almost completely eliminated. And then tetanus and pertussis, which are two diseases in the DTaP or Tdap vaccine as well. Pertussis in particular, as you can see, was still around in the US in 1999. However, we have had epidemics of pertussis, which is also the disease that it causes is whooping cough. Now, historically, whooping cough was so rare that doctors, for a while, in the 90s and early 2000s, forgot how to diagnose whooping cough. But it's now become so common that dozens of children are dying in the United States since 1999 as a result of this completely preventable disease. Part of the reason for this is that children who are newborns cannot be vaccinated against whooping cough effectively, and so they remain susceptible to whooping cough for the first 3 months of their life. If they encounter an individual that's carrying whooping cough, then they can contract this disease and die from it. Now, this completely preventable disease is being transmitted to newborns because only about 2/3 of the children in the United States today are fully vaccinated. 1 out of every 3 children do not have all of the vaccines recommended to them by the CDC, and as a result could be carrying deadly diseases to younger siblings or transmitting it to the younger siblings of their friends on playgrounds, in daycares, and so forth. Likewise, some of these diseases that you see here were aimed for total eradication. Measles was supposed to be completely eradicated out of the US, and it is no longer. Mumps was supposed to be completely eradicated by 2010, but in 2006, just prior to that, we ended up getting the largest mumps outbreak in 2 decades, pushing the eradication in the US back by years. Rubella, thankfully, has not bounced back too much in the US, but because it is common in other parts of the world with global travel, we could start to see rubella in the US more as well. All of this because parents think that vaccines may cause some side effects in their children that have no scientific basis at all. In fact, what we do know is that the diseases they prevent can be deadly. But there's another vaccine that has a different kind of controversy, and that vaccine is against HPV. HPV is a sexually transmitted infection that can only be diagnosed in women using a Pap smear and cannot be diagnosed in men. In most instances, this type of virus causes no symptoms and no side effects, but occasionally in women, this virus can infect cells of the cervix and can cause cervical cancer. In fact, prior to the development of this vaccine, thousands of people in the US died from cervical cancer every year, completely as a result of this virus. Hence, why Pap smears for women were recommended. However, since the development of the HPV vaccine and recognition that HPV causes cervical cancer, we essentially have a vaccine against a type of cancer. Amazing that we can have a vaccine-preventable cancer. That vaccine can be injected not just in women, but also in men. in order to prevent the spread of this virus. This virus is also known to cause throat cancer, and so can also prevent cases of throat cancer, which of course are a consequence of oral sex. However, most parents don't provide this vaccine to their children because the vaccine is against a sexually transmitted infection, and parents don't want to think about their little girls having sex. And so instead, young women go without this vaccine and are then susceptible to acquiring the virus, transmitting it to other people, and possibly contracting and possibly even dying from cervical cancer. So this vaccine isn't given to young ladies, not because of the possible side effects, but because the parents don't want to think about their little girls having sex, a totally different type of controversy. Now, before we go, I want to talk about two of the major successes that we have had with vaccines. The first, of course, is smallpox. Smallpox is caused by a virus known as variola major. It results in pustules forming in the face, hands, and feet, and a little bit in the torso of individuals infected with this virus. About 1 out of every 3 people that are infected with smallpox end up dying from this disease, and those who survive end up with permanent scars covering their body. This disease has been with humans for thousands and thousands of years and was just considered part of human existence. It's so easily transmitted from person to person through coughing, sneezing, touch, or even sharing of food or items. And remember that this was the first disease that was targeted by vaccines by Edward Jenner. In the subsequent 200 years, the vaccination against smallpox resulted in its total eradication from Earth, saving millions and millions of lives every year. That was vaccine's first success story, and we're hoping to have a second within the next few decades. And that would be for polio. Polio is transmitted by the digestive tract. So you eat or drink this virus. Most people who ingest the polio virus don't come down with any symptoms at all and transmit it to other people. However, there are small numbers of infected individuals, roughly 10%, where the virus can lead to paralysis or even death. Most of the time, this virus would cause paralysis of just a single limb, like you see here. However, in some instances, it could cause total body paralysis, leading an individual to live the rest of their life in what was referred to as an iron lung. The iron lung was a device that would cause pressure on the chest in order to help the individual breathe. The first vaccine against polio was developed by Jonas Salk, and it was developed in the 1950s. Eventually, this vaccine was tested, and other vaccines like it were distributed around the world, so that now there are only few areas of the globe where polio still exists. As you can see, it does not exist anywhere in the Americas anymore. And so if you are born in the Americas and do not travel to other parts of the world, you are not likely to ever need or receive the polio vaccine. As you can see, there are still some isolated areas in the earth that have polio, but the World Health Organization is aiming to make polio completely eradicated from the areas as well, so that we will never have polio in human beings again. That's it for our lecture. I hope you learned a lot about vaccines, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture.